From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here. One of the many magical qualities of Marvel movies is the company's willingness to take a chance on filmmakers and composers whose backgrounds are rooted in far less epic, but just as rewarding personal stories and sounds. Their newest example, and 10 Rings in Point, is the spectacular leveling up of the director-musician team of Destin Daniel Cretton and Joel P. West. Beginning their feature collaboration with 2012's indie music drama I Am Not a Hipster, before playing the at-risk angst of Short Term 12, hearing a young woman's emotionally fraught family journey to the glass castle, and then making an impassioned orchestral plea for just mercy. Cretton and West's collaborations have been distinguished with a strong sense of melodic character. Twin talents that now take a gigantic leap into a whole bigger universe with SHANG-CHI and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Dipping into a magical bag of Oriental fantasy, hard-hitting drums, ancient Asian instruments, and the glistening main theme, it's lushly impactful music that's far more about the dragon power of Chi than superheroics. Emotionally driven action that's pitch perfect for a hero in search of his destiny while dealing with major league daddy issues. It's a captivating East meets West musical adventure that goes from real-world kick-ass to a spectacular fantasy realm, with a strong individuality front and center as it is in all of Cretton and West's collaborations, but certainly no more spectacularly resonant given the stuff of a third-wave comic book to film Marvel Legend with its first Asian master of Kung Fu. And now here to talk about sweeping the nightmare dragon leg with the new Marvel musical bound is Shang-Chi composer Joel P. West. Welcome to Film Music Live, Joel.
Hi, thank you.
Well, it's great to have you here. I suspect this film is going to be the introduction to your music of several million people who haven't been familiar with your work before in some really wonderful films with Destin. Tell us a little bit about your musical origin story.
Yeah, I'm kind of a hack that just fell in love with music as a kid, young adult. My sister got a guitar for Christmas when I was like 12 or 13, and she didn't really play it, so I stole it and I started writing songs and kind of used music as a way to discover kind of the bigger world that was out there. I had a slightly sheltered upbringing. And so I really come at it from a songwriter approach. I think music used to be the most important to me as an outlet for just writing lyrics and kind of figuring out how I don't know, understanding the world and my place in it. And then I started kind of experimenting with strings and realizing that music can kind of capture something that the lyrics couldn't, and kind of portray or sort of capture the bigger feelings I have that you can't really put words to. And so when I discovered film music, it was kind of a natural fit because I think for me, music just is a way to sort of understand and capture the way that the way I'm experiencing things and what I'm feeling. And so I love visual storytelling because we're just literally doing that, just kind of trying to figure out what a feeling should sound like, and or what a turn or a change should feel like. So that's kind of how I got here. But I'm very much a songwriter first. Destin sort of pulled me into the film music world about a decade ago and got the bug for that. But I'm just kind of a curious, not very trained person who just loves listening to music and soaking in it. And now I'm very grateful to get to spend most of my time interacting with it in one way or another.
So what were respectively the pop or the alt bands that got you into songwriting, and the film scores that made you want to become a film composer?
Yeah, I would say it's probably my number one musical hero is Bjork, I would say. And I think I got introduced to big, lush strings through her music, and just her sort of unapologetic, like exactly what her head and heart feel like, because she's so raw and so open. And so I think Bjork, and also it's very Iceland centric, but Sigur Rós is also a big kind of shift for me. I had like a pop punk band in high school, as you do. So I was more into, kind of loud music. And then I found Radiohead and Sigur Rós, and kind of started to get into it, music that just sort of moved me in a way that I had never experienced before. And so I think that was kind of the early introduction, because a lot of that Sigur Rós music could probably just go into a movie and work fine. So I started making music that sort of mimics film music anyways, without really thinking about its relation to that. And then ultimately realized that there's an outlet to kind of make that stuff, and not need to even do lyrics. So that's kind of where I came into it.
Very, very cool. But in terms, again, of film scores, was there any particular film score even kind of coming up, playing with bands that say, hey, this is pretty cool?
Definitely. I got introduced to film when I went to college, because my family just didn't grow up watching movies. And so Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, 100% was, that was the first film score that I would just listen to all the time, just in my car or on walks and stuff like that. I also loved Amelie, and the Wes Anderson movies. That's kind of where I came into film, was that era of like Spike Jonze, Michel Gondry, Wes Anderson, P.T. Anderson. So that was kind of my early introduction, and the music in those films kind of does sound a little more like a band. The John Bryan thing really clicked with me, because I felt like, oh, I could make that. Like I could actually do that. And I think that was a good entry point for me.
Very cool. Now, how did you first meet Destin?
Destin and I met in San Diego. We went to the same very small school down there, and it's also just a really small creative community. So we have some mutual friends. He's slightly older than me, so we weren't necessarily in the same circle, but I was kind of aware of him, and I think we were kind of fans of each other. In San Diego, if you want to be serious about doing something creative, you kind of have to tap into the community and go support others, and kind of have them support you. And it's a cool little circle. And so I think we just gravitated towards each other, because we were both, I don't know, maybe taking our work a little more seriously than some of the other creatives we were around in San Diego. And I was a big fan of his. And then eventually he started making some music videos for my band, The Tree Ring. And I started doing some music for some little film projects he was getting hired for. And it just sort of naturally led to us doing features, and really learning how to do that together.
Very cool. I mean, now your first major film, you did I'm Not a Hipster, but essentially the first film that you guys did that really kind of got, a mainstream release was Short Term 12. And they could say it was almost like a breeding ground for Marvel, because you've got Brie Larson, and that was kind of the movie that put her on the map as well. And it's a very strong, dramatic film about, counselors dealing with juvenile delinquents and kids in trouble. What was that experience like, doing essentially that first real film score?
Yeah, it really was my first film score. It was mostly just about kind of trying to take Destin's cues, because I really had no idea how that world worked. And Short Term 12 is from Destin's real experience, working in a facility like that, and just everything that he saw there, and how he contextualized that in his own life, and kind of just the perspective he gained. And so it was a lot of just him trusting me to just try things, which is still the case. That's still how we work. He kind of just lets me go, and then gives me notes of kind of what's working and what's not, and where to steer things emotionally. So it was very much just a Destin saying, just go for it, just kind of go for it, and we'll figure out how this all works. And then and really just kind of taking his lead of understanding how to capture the experience he'd had at that place, and sort of what he felt about it. So it was kind of our first chance to learn how to talk to each other about him to say, I need it to feel like this, and then for me to figure out, okay, musically, how do I take what I've made and steer it to feel that way? So it was a really good little education, especially because it was very open-ended creatively, and just very like authentic. Just a really cool, authentic crew that made that movie, and I think you can feel it. It's a very real feeling. So we just kind of went for it. And I think it was something that stemmed from us knowing how to, us being trusting of each other and knowing each other pretty well at that point, and just kind of just went for it, really.
Yeah, I mean, and what's cool is that, Short Term 12 had a kind of very spare approach, if you will, using, kind of a lot of very alt sound. But when you did your next film, with Brie and Joel, The Glass Castle, which is a very, very good film about this girl and her dysfunctional family and kind of coming to terms with that. How that kind of, in a way, kind of upped your game, I think, into say, okay, I could do like a, for the lack of a better word, of a conventional film score.
Yeah, it was really exciting for me because, Short Term 12 led to me getting hired for some other indie movies. And for the most part, those movies, which I love this world of film, but they're very verite. We're trying to recreate reality or make it feel very real, and not tell the audience what to think, and just kind of let them be there as though they're really at, a place like Short Term 12 or something like that. And so The Glass Castle had to do more with like a childhood, the way that a child experiences the world, and it's a little larger than life. And so it was fun to start experimenting with kind of going off of the just hyper real, very subtle thing, and trying to capture something that's a little more of like what's going on in your head and heart, that is maybe, a bigger experience than it actually is what's going on. So that was a cool chance. It also was my first time to get to work with a big string group, and I'm just a big string fan, and I've always worked with string quartet stuff in, as I was learning, just because that's what I had access to. So it was my first time getting to work with a big group of string players. My orchestrator, Mark Graham, I also met him on that job, and it was just learned a ton from him. It was just a huge learning experience for me.
And then after that, you get to your first, real studio film, which is Just Mercy, which is an incredibly powerful film. And it really, I think, gave people who are convinced on the righteousness of the death penalty pause as to how the death penalty actually works. And again, you're dealing with some really huge, weighty subjects. How did, again, that kind of up your game as a composer?
Yeah, I would say, it's funny because Shang-Chi is so big, but I think there's felt a lot more pressure personally just on Just Mercy, because it's such a rare chance to bring Bryan Stevenson's story to people who maybe otherwise weren't going to come across him, or really, as you're saying, think twice about the death penalty and just how our justice system works. So that was a big experiment. We knew we didn't want it to feel just like a traditional movie, and we wanted to capture some of Bryan Stevenson's musical tastes and his interests. So it was a big puzzle, and it wasn't the easiest process to find. Just kind of trying to triangulate all these different aspects of just tones we wanted the movie to have, and also just having like a cool, just having African American involvement in the making of the music, and hiring some people to kind of turn it over to. So it was a puzzle, and it was kind of an interesting project, film music wise, but just an absolute joy to be around that world, and truly transformed me as a person, of just the way I understand some things, even stuff I thought I really understood of experiences people have in that world, and just the experience of just being a person of color, just in day-to-day life. Things I thought I knew, and just that really got upended in spending time in Bryan Stevenson's world. So that was just a huge honor, and felt much bigger than just doing a score. It was kind of a very like whole being sort of committed to this thing for a year type of a thing for Destin and all of us.
And then we get to Shang-Chi, and forgive me if I keep mispronouncing
Shang-Chi.
the name. Shang-Chi. I'm an old school master of Kung Fu comic book collector, so it was such a treat. I mean, now when Destin got this, I mean, did he like call you, hey, I got offered this? Like, because again, I just love how Marvel kind of dips into the world of alternative filmmakers, to pull some really interesting talent that you wouldn't expect to do a film like this.
Yeah, I think I think Marvel, they're very smart. They're hiring people who know how to make really believable characters and character driven stories, because Marvel has the goods on the action and the VFX and all that. And so it's really beautiful to me getting to see somebody like Destin do a movie like this, because he filled in the gaps of sort of the Marvel formula with things that are so authentic and so relatable, and at times it's really raw. Like I still get pretty emotional watching the movie. So yeah, he kind of went out to, the same team made Short Term 12, Glass Castle, and Just Mercy for the most part. A lot of the same key people, and so he's a very gracious person, and he went out to all of us saying, "I'd love to have you. I don't know what this experience is going to be. I'd like to have friends, and I'd like to have people I know how to work with." But he's like, no hard feelings at all if you don't want to get into it, because I just don't know what to expect. And he's also like, he's also kind of like, I can't guarantee you a job because it's not ultimately my decision. And so I just figured, sure, I'll pitch that. That sounds like just a really cool thing to be a part of. And I don't know if I have any business doing that, but I'll go interview and pitch for it, and ultimately got it. And so we just kind of went, all right, let's see what this is all about.
What do you think was the magical martial arts move that got you this job?
I think for Destin and me, it's maybe it comes more from the wisdom side of martial arts movie, of just being calm and being yourself. I think we both went out for this being like, there's no way I can try and fake my way into this. Clearly, I haven't ever done anything like it, and so I think we both just went and said, this is who I am. This is why I'm interested in this. This is what I do. And they hired us. And so that's how it went. And ultimately that's how it was too. They're so trusting and so encouraging of the creative process over there. It was so refreshing. I just had no idea what to expect, but they're total artists. And they, as Dustin has said, they're like little kids. They just love trying things. And if you have a great scene that works great, you've never seen anything as good in your life as the scene, but you have an extra hour at the end of the day, they're always like, let's see if there's something else there. Maybe let's just try cutting it up. We can always put it back. So it's very fun. It's very open creatively over there. And I think they hired us being like, yeah, we'll put your voice on it. And if you need help, just call us. And it was, that was very true.
Now, when you got the gig, I mean, was it like a deep dive into the comic books, or just as an audience member, was it just about going to see Marvel movies in terms of kind of absorbing this movie universe to take this job on?
Yeah, for me, it was a big responsibility on two levels that I'm an outsider to. One is the most important, is I'm not an Asian American person, and that is who this story is for, and that's what the story is centered on, that experience. And so, and I've never been to China. I haven't spent much time just digging into that world. And so for Chinese American, Asian American, Chinese mainland people who are going to go see this movie, that was kind of the first responsibility, is that this was that we just did something that was exciting and not annoying or offensive, or just we wanted to just be an awesome celebration. So that was kind of the first side of it. And the other thing is I had not seen all the Marvel movies. Wasn't a big Marvel fan. So I did a deep dive on that too. So for me, it was like not as much, it was more like watching the MCU movies, figuring out how they all interact, and kind of what's consistent, and where there's wiggle room, and where there's kind of a core thing that we're probably going to be keeping. And then just I spent like a 3-month period of just not touching the piano or the computer, and just only doing research on just Chinese music, and just like kind of where the differences in why Western music exists versus why traditional Chinese music exists, and trying to think of how we might be able to do something interesting with just the methodology and ethos of those two worlds, and kind of trying to bring them together in a more in the undercurrent of why and how the music is made.
Well, I'm going to start throwing some audience questions into the ring for you. And we've got one from Eric. Let's talk about percussion. What types of drums percussion were used, and where did you find the performers? How much research went into finding the specific percussion?
Yeah, good question. There are a lot of little treats in the score, of kind of like, there are a lot of different instruments that you hear a little bit here and there, but the backbone of it is these big Tango drums. They're big wide drums that you typically see played in a big group in like a festival performance, like a Lunar New Year thing, or like just usually like at some kind of a big celebration, and there'll be a group of 4 or 5, sometimes 10 people playing the same part. And so that's tradition. That's what we based a lot of SHANG-CHI's kind of fight stuff and just kind of his swag around, is trying to get some energy out of these big drum group performances. And then there's also, we use some Peking opera instruments which have these cool cymbals that are little small gongs that bend the pitch. They kind of go boom boom, and big lion cymbals that also you'd hear in kind of a big loud lively festival performance. So there's quite a few things. There's paigu drums. There's a bongu drum, which is like this really thick head. They play it with these pretty small sticks, and it makes kind of a clacking, rattly sound. Trying to think what else is in there. There's kind of a ton of stuff. And for all of the Chinese instruments, we worked with a group in UK called the UK Chinese Music Ensemble, and they brought some different players to bring some of the traditional instruments. And then all of our percussion is also backed up with big percussion that we recorded at Abbey Road, just to get the size of the room. Those Tango drums have a super cool sound, but they don't have a lot of like oomph, like a lot of thick low end. So we would have the percussionists at Abbey Road just do huge hits on like big orchestral drums to back that up. So it's kind of a stew pot. Also tricky. This whole score is recorded remotely because of COVID. So that was kind of a tricky aspect of it, is just finding the instruments, finding the players, and getting them into Abbey Road was a whole project. I hope we do more of this. Hopefully I'll get to go in person next time.
Cool. I mean, I just love the theme, which really is a huge driving force in the score. And it almost is this kind of cycling da 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 da, and it almost kind of flows. It cycles through the whole score.
Yeah, that's intentional. I'm glad you picked up on that. We kind of Shang-Chi's music is sort of a mashup of all these different pieces of who he is, and in the movie you see him kind of reconciling with different aspects of his own identity and of his family history. And so his music, that it sort of tracks the movie as well, as he reconciles these different pieces of himself. Things get added, little themes and little different musical worlds get added into his sort of hero suite. And so what he gets from his dad and what he gets from his mom are very different things. And from his dad's music's not very traditionally Chinese. It's a little more Western, because he's more of an individualist, kind of strong, exceptional, trying to kind of pave his own path by being just powerful and an individual that's rising above the others. Where his mom's music has a much more kind of Taoist, traditional Chinese ethos to it, that's more about connecting to nature, knowing where you fit into the community, kind of everything having its equal place and then being in balance. And so her music, which Shang-Chi ultimately takes on, it is in a traditional sense of kind of traditional Chinese methodology, is it doesn't really have a beginning or end. It's just sort of ever flowing, almost as though that's always happening. And when you hear it, it's like we're just plugging the speaker in and unplugging it. And it's kind of hard to find the start and stop. It's just kind of like a cycle that's churning and is connected to the natural world. So that's when you hear her music, it's more, you hear it on the more traditional Chinese instruments and with kind of some effects, because it's a little bit mysterious. And then ultimately when Shang-Chi gets it, it's played a little on kind of some bigger guns with orchestral stuff and brass and all that.
And that kind of goes to our next you kind of answered it a little bit, but Ramon Calvofite loved to see him with Shang's parents that had gorgeous, pretty music instead of typical action music. Who's the idea, what were the challenges? And again, it kind of goes to, when you listen to this wonderful album, that came out, there's action music, but most of it is like really emotional music that's been chosen for the presentation. And that's what I particularly liked. And especially, when it comes to the amazing Tony Leung, is that I really can't remember the last time I've seen essentially the quote villain given, so much personality and explanation and depth. I mean, it's almost astonishing.
Yeah, it's really cool because, by the way, great question, Ramon. I think it's my favorite scene of the movie and my favorite piece of music too. And part of the reason I love it is because I do not have an answer to the question of whose idea was it, or I don't even really remember where we started on that cue, because luckily it was one of the first things that they shot, and so I had that scene very early. In fact, I had it before they had a COVID shutdown, and for a few months on set, and so um, it went through so many iterations, but ultimately it was kind of the idea of trying to make something that at the start feels like, oh, these people are going to fight, and ultimately kind of slowly teasing into some flirting and connecting, and it becoming really more of a dance. And there are a few scenes in the movie where the action sequences do feel more like a dance almost than a fight. And there's these beautiful camera movements, and there's kind of larger than life, martial arts stuff going on. And so it was really fun to try and echo that. Destin approached every action scene really with an emotional motivation. Like, what does this mean for the character? Why are we here? And it's really cool. I think you can feel that in the film. Some of them are really just fun and funny and have kind of a Jackie Chan sensibility, and then others, like the mom and dad fight at the beginning of the movie. It's just a beautiful dance. It's like a beautiful. It's very Ang Lee, and ultimately I had tried to do something that was a little more beefy and actiony, and it just didn't work. So it's really a process of just trying to capture what Destin made, which I thought was just stunning. Like, what would this sound like? I've never quite seen this, so we're gonna have to just kind of stab at it until we find something that fits what I'm seeing on screen. And it was, I love when music goes through such a long process that I don't even know how we got there, and that scene is very much one of those. Just went through so many different phases that ultimately landed in this kind of delicate balance that I just love.
Yeah, again, I just love that. That really sets the tone. In a way, I didn't feel like I was watching like a martial arts film. I felt like I was watching a Fred Astaire film. I half expected Cheek to Cheek to suddenly just erupt into the soundtrack with just how beautifully, and it really has some of the best martial arts choreography I've ever seen. And again, it's kind of like a nice movie in a way, because not putting down the amazing Bruce Lee, but there definitely are some nastier martial arts films, that really go for the visceral, let's kill the guy. But in this, essentially, people get accidentally hurt. No one is out to kill anybody, really. How does that impact the scoring of the martial arts scenes? Especially, it's always interested me, like, how do you choose what hits to actually hit and what just to play right through?
Yeah, film music is so strange because it feels like the more I do it, the less I know. It's always just about trial and error, and I think it was more about thinking through the way I always do with a scene for Dustin is what's the emotional journey that, what does this mean to the character that's in it? Because every fight scene in this movie is like has an emotional weight to it. He's like fighting with family members, or trying to protect his friend, or there's just a lot of weight to everything. And so that's really how we thought about it, was trying to think. Yeah, for me, I love some of those martial arts movies, partially just for the little wisdom that's kind of built in with, there's always like a master teacher, bringing, kind of helping somebody learn the ways. And I feel like there's always this really introspective wisdom in those movies that just really cuts deep for me. Even like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is something that it's such a meditation to me. Like, just watching that movie makes me like really go there, and it's like I need to go take a walk after I watch it to just kind of chew on the wisdom that you absorb by watching it. And so I think I like that our movie, I think Destin really tapped into that side of it. There's going to be some fights and some cool choreography, and at times just even some like goofy martial arts stuff that's just fun to watch. But at its core, it's about somebody reconciling with themselves. And you meet a character at the beginning, and he is the same person at the end of the movie as he was at the beginning, but he just is now accepted it and is thriving in it, versus kind of hiding from himself, or trying to get away from his own truth. So I think that's really where all of the music of this movie came from. It's just trying to capture that journey, And it was really fun to think about how we could do that in even a big set piece action movie that's going to be in a Marvel, like big Marvel action sequence. How do we bring that kind of ethos to it? And it was a super cool puzzle to figure out how to bring kind of the emotional quality in without losing some of the just the boomy kind of exciting thing that Marvel's so good at doing.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thrilled with just how well the film did. Only in theaters. You cannot watch this on cable, and it should be experienced in IMAX, which is the whole full IMAX screen, which leads us to Sachinadand. Apologize for the pronunciation. Again, she watched Shang-Chi on IMAX a few days back, and it was the first movie theater experience in a year. And again, with this question, maybe talk about some of the deeper dive that you made into researching Asian instruments for the score. Like how deep did you go culturally to just nail the sound?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. That was to me the biggest part of this is and to be honest, when Dustin and I first talked about the movie, we were not so sure there would be an Asian element to the music, because Dustin's interest was to make a really relatable family story that has all the guns of a Marvel movie, but has a lot of heart, and ultimately it was a character journey. And so we weren't sure if we would even go there into a kind of a Chinese sound or Chinese instruments, because it was more about the sort of thematic journey of the characters. Ultimately, we kind of landed on, it kind of echoes the Asian American experience of needing to decide, am I this or am I that, or am I going to go all the way with like my parents' culture and their wishes, or am I just going to go with kind of what my friends at school are doing, and kind of having it feel like you have to choose. And we wanted to see a character, celebrate and accept and thrive in all of those pieces of himself. And so ultimately we realized, his mom is very traditional. Her music should be traditionally Chinese because she really comes from that ethos. And so her music, there was a deep study of just going, let's go really deep back. Let's go really, really ancient, traditional folk music, really Chinese folk music. So we have the erhu and pipa, guzheng, flutes like the zhao and the dizi that have been around for a very, very long time and are sacred in a way of just the way that they have been a part of just life in different regions, and have kind of, a lot of worker songs and just things that are played, around the fire at night type of things, like old stuff. So we kind of centered her music around that instrumentation and kind of, but really thinking more of why the music exists and what it's there to do. It's there to kind of calm emotion, to connect us to nature, connect us to each other, kind of put us in a meditative state that sort of puts you in with just the flow of energy in the universe and that sort of thing. So that's her music. But then we also have some music that is connected to Shang-Chi's childhood. And so for that music, it ended up going, there should be a Chinese sensibility to it, in the sense of just things they remember from their childhood and things that might have been playing in the house or things that their parents interacted with. And so for that music, I ended up going on a deep dive more in 20th century Chinese classical music. And there's just some, the 20th century in China is just a pretty fascinating and intense history with lots of chapters, that just so much to learn for me in that regard. But there's all this wonderful music that came out of Western orchestras, kind of people bringing in Western orchestra into China, and these Chinese composers kind of bringing in traditional sensibilities and playing styles and pentatonic scale into full string sections and harp and piano and flutes and the sorts of things you see in a European orchestra. And so things like the Butterfly Lovers, the what is it, Yellow River Cantata, I think I have that right. Just these like kind of flagship pieces that happened in the mid 20th century ended up being a big inspiration for the music that's related to Shang-Chi and Xiaoling's childhood, because it's things that maybe happened around the time they were kids. And there's a lot of kind of nostalgic feel to that music. And so some of it is that it's more Western orchestra playing things with a Chinese sensibility. And that's kind of went down a deep road on that for that side of his music.
Now, Louis Vercellini, you talked to Dustin about Joel, about all the changes that Marvel makes in their films, and Louis would love to know how much music was composed for the score that didn't make it into the film, and the reason he's asking is because he just loved the music. I love the music. We'd love a CD of this, and that echoes another question we got from Andrew John about hopefully seeing like a CD release of this down the road.
That is very kind. Thank you guys. I really appreciate that. There is quite a bit of music that didn't make the score album. It was kind of a tricky process putting it together because there's a lot of music that was made for scenes that didn't end up in the movie, and then a lot of music that maybe was something we were trying and ultimately went away from. So there's a decent amount of music, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 minutes that I would say kind of isn't quite Shang-Chi music in the end. It's stuff we tried that ultimately led us to try something else later. One of the joys of working on a project this big is that we had multiple recording sessions. So we had a lot of chance to try things, see that they didn't work, come back, try something, do it again in a different way, or kind of let it develop. But there's also quite a few cues that I think could have made the album, but I just wanted to make an album that feels very listenable and wasn't too fat. So I'm not in charge of if we get a physical release. I'm not so sure it's going to happen. I hope it does, but there is a lot of extra content. So I'm voting for a deluxe CD. That would be great, and I appreciate the interest. But we'll have to see what the studio wants to do with it.
Now, obviously, the movie goes through a lot of different directions. Now, I'm a big fan of Awkwafina, and one of these days, I want her to actually be a romantic lead. How do you think the score might have changed if she was a romantic, Chang's romantic character, as opposed to best bud that Awkwafina often plays?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it was nice to get to make at least a little bit of romantic music, for me, and Dustin as well, just getting a chance to work on something at this scale that's, to make a brand new world. It's not a reboot. It's like a whole new thing, and it has license to go deep on these big themes. And for Dustin to just get to shoot these huge sequences, beautiful cinematic sequences and action stuff. I think both of us are kind of like, well, I want, I may not get to do this again, so I want a chance to try all of these things. And it was fun to get to do just a little bit of romantic music for Wenwu and Lee meeting and things around the family life. But for Awkwafina, I mean, it's so funny. If that was a stronger romantic lead, I don't know, because it's I have to think about what Shang-Chi, where his music would kind of go if that attraction was there. I feel like it would be connected, as all of us are. We sort of, it would probably echo Wenwu and Lee's sort of romantic music, because I think that would make sense. But I don't know. Maybe we'll have a chance to do it in the future. Who knows?
Hopefully the friend zone will get broken in the sequel. So, and now Thomas McGuire's got a question. You mentioned again about some of those particular films, and again the wonderful movies from people like John Woo, Stephen Chow, Kung Fu Hustler, Jackie Chan. Were there any particular films from these people that struck you when you were scoring the film?
That's a great question. Also a great profile pick, Thomas. I did watch a lot of those movies thinking, okay, I'll probably learn something that we can do with ours. But there's a lot of music in those movies that is so traditionally Chinese. I felt like it kind of wasn't the right thing for what we were doing. And also, it's unfortunately, there's so much Western versions of Asian music that are just so distasteful and either just kind of an eye roll, or just sometimes just horrifically offensive. And we kind of made a commitment at the beginning of this movie that if anything was starting to feel or sound like something that doesn't honor the real Asian American experience, or is just kind of something that people already have to put up with enough of, let's just ditch it. Because even if it's great and we love it, if it kind of reminds us of something like that, then we'll just ditch it because that's completely the opposite of what we're here to do. And so ultimately, a lot of the music in those movies I felt like was something. It was so there's such a true Chinese sensibility with it that it kind of we weren't going to go all the way there, and if we did, it might just feel like yet another Western movie that's trying to be authentically Chinese and ultimately just kind of sounds outsider and a little patronizing. So they were an influence just in thinking, especially the Jackie Chan stuff of thinking about like how fun the music can be and how you can be seeing this crazy stuff happen, but also like just have a good time. And there was a lot of that, but ultimately the music, it didn't inform me a ton. Although the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon score I think is beautiful, and I really clicked with the composer Tan Dun who made that score, and has also scored some other Chinese films, American films, and then just done a lot of cool composition work that's outside of film that I think ended up being a huge influence on this movie, because his ability to write melodies and cool rhythms that are truly Chinese but have kind of an epic film quality. He was a huge influence on this to me. There's a piece he made called The Wolf that is just breathtaking. I spent a lot of time with that music. So yeah, long answer, kind of an answer, but that's kind of what I got from those movies.
I mean, this is such a a spectacular success, kind of leveling up story for you and Destin, which leads to our question from Meet Doka. Love the SHANG-CHI score. What advice would you give to young aspiring composers?
My advice, Meet, is just make stuff all day, every day, and don't wait to get hired or don't wait for a real opportunity to just be doing things. That's, at least from my experience, what has gone right for me is if I'm just making a lot of music all the time, it tends to open doors. And film music is also, it's a mysterious thing. It's hard to learn. It's hard to teach. I truly, I'm like getting nervous about whenever I start my next job after Shang-Chi, because every time I start a movie, I just think, I don't know how to do, I can't do this. I don't know how I did that last time, because it's such a mysterious process. And it is one of those things that you kind of only can get good at by just spending a lot of time with it. So my advice is just to make work and just try things. Don't go trying to just copy what other people are doing and figure out how they're doing it. Just make music that interests you. Score your own scenes, pull some clips off a movie, and just score them and try things. Even just temping, like doing your own temp, like pulling up a scene from a movie that you like or don't like or whatever, pulling up something from YouTube and just playing different music underneath it just to see what happens. We do a lot of that. Dustin and I often will just grab a ton of stuff and just watch a scene over and over with different kinds of music and go, whoa, look what happens when you do that. And then sometimes it's a big laugh, like, oh my gosh, that doesn't work at all, or that makes this scene feel so weird. But it's so much trial and error. And so spending time with it is how you get good at it. And I think it's also how you wind up in opportunities, is just doing it rather than being asked to do it, or, don't wait around for that. Just be doing it, and it will kind of take its course, I think.
Now, Dale's got a question. What was the palette picking process like for Shang-Chi? Again, you've got thousands of years of Asian musical culture. How do you choose what to use?
So I would say that's a great question. I would say the answer to that is that there's two phases to it, and I always like to make film music in a couple phases. First, just making some initial music that's not to any specific scenes, and just finding kind of a cool palette of just generally speaking, and some cool melodies that feel right to the director and feel right to me. And then there's a second process, which is now you have picture and we're scoring scenes and we're trying to get the scenes to function correctly for the arcs of the movie. And so actually implementing that music into scenes and figuring out how it works and seeing where it needs to go from there. So the initial music I made, kind of just demos for this movie, I tried everything. Every Chinese instrument that exists, I think, just at some point made it in there just to see what would happen, just trying things, and trying to refine kind of what is interesting. And so we had a process of that, but ultimately I would say the answer to your question is the way we refine the palette is just seeing how it worked for specific scenes and for just the overall storytelling. It's so fun to make a movie. You know, there's a very John Williams, Amblin, or Star Wars even sensibility to this movie, that there's license to kind of have this world building and different to hear different music when you go to different places or you see different characters. And so that was we trimmed a lot of fat by kind of figuring out, okay, if we only use, you know, the Erhu, every time that Shang-Chi's mom is present, you hear the Erhu. So we ended up taking the Erhu out of everything else, even though our player Wang Zhao, everything she played was so beautiful. We wanted to use all of it, but we ended up refining that to go, if you only hear that when his mom is referenced, that's really powerful, because you get kind of a feeling. You maybe won't ever notice it, but you'll feel something. Same thing with some of her kind of when she's doing her chi movements. We use Guzheng, Pipa, Yangqin, you know, a lot of like plucked and string instruments, traditional Chinese instruments. So we've decided, okay, we'll use that for her when she's kind of tapping into ancient Ta Lo ancestry and her kind of community and training there. But when you hear it, the Shang-Chi, let's take it and put it on Western instruments like harp and piano and strings and brass. So the movie, we went so deep just on, so it was just a long process, and it's so fun to have license to kind of go that deep. And so it started fat, and we kind of just trimmed it down to think about, how do we support the characters? How do we kind of make it feel different each time we turn to these different chapters of his life? And that ultimately tends to be where we go. And for Shang-Chi too, we just realized, you know, his music probably shouldn't have any traditional Chinese instruments. He's like just a cool American guy, and that's he has a clearly an Asian, a Chinese American sensibility, but he's like many people his age, probably don't really want to hear a Guzheng playing like when they're fighting. He wants to, you know, it's like a little bit more, he has like a masculinity that feels a little more Western. So we kind of, you know, he's tapping into the kind of these beefier orchestral things. So yeah, that's kind of where it went. It's really just all thematic, character driven, what fits each of those characters and where they fit in Shang-Chi's story.
Yeah, you know, one thing I particularly liked about the film is kind of how it kind of morphs into something bigger and much more magical, until, you know, essentially all these films have their really cool kind of visual effects climaxes where it's like 20 minutes of just insane visual effects, which is where your John Williams chi has got to be drawn out for the insane dragon fight at the end of the film. But what was the challenge like, again, of just really putting this really incredible emotion into these dazzling, just continual big ass visual effects fight that, you know, is the climax of the film?
I think for me, because I'd never done anything like this, remotely like this, it was just a matter of just trying not to overthink it. And I think that's what everybody on this project was doing. Just I love Marvel's process is make it and then see, like, there's no bad ideas there. Just make it and then we'll see what's there. If nothing else, it's going to help us get to a better idea. So it was a lot of just throwing stuff at the wall. And then, as I was saying too, you know, I got to work with this huge orchestra at Abbey Road. For me, as a musician who's just always independently funding my own music projects, the chance to work with that kind of resources, I definitely wanted to use them. Like, I wanted to go all out. So I was excited that we have dragons fighting and crazy stuff like that, because it gave us license to just pump up the whole orchestra and just go there. And also, I just love variations on a theme. It's so fun to take things that are so delicate or so emotional at certain parts of the movie and play just like on a solo harp or a solo cello or something like that, and then get to go full, like we were doing 2 takes of orchestra on it. So, you know, there's like, you know, 150 instruments playing this thing that you heard before on just a solo cello. And I just love getting to play with that and seeing what happens to the same music when you know, pump it up with huge instruments, or then take it onto something traditionally Chinese, or put it just on the harp or just on a piano. And so a lot of that, just kind of coming up with these core themes and then just seeing what happens when we stretch them to whatever instrumentation felt right for the scene. Super fun.
I mean, it's just, you know, incredible, you know, again, for a film that partially was shot during, you know, pandemic, and the score that was, it's just how seamless and, you know, just pre-pandemic it is, for the lack of a better description. I mean, at what point? I mean, what was the stuff that was shot after the shutdown, and what were just like the big challenges of getting this quality, done through all this?
Yeah, for me, it ended up being the pandemic was kind of a help because it, in a weird way, because the word COVID had never been heard by any of us when they started shooting the movie, and then all of a sudden it got shut down. But they had shot some really important stuff thematically already, and so it gave us a chance to explore it a little bit, cut it, get some music going for it, see what everybody thinks. Get Kevin Feige and his team involved early on. So there was something really cool about getting to. I think that the movie is a product of just I think it's very tough to make good creative work quickly. Like, it's nice to get away from something. Whenever I'm making an album, I like to write some songs, put them away for like 6 months, come back to them, figure out what's working and build them up bigger, get away from them again. Like, I love the process of making things, getting away from it, coming back with fresh perspective. And we had a ton of chance for that. I mean, it was a pain. There was like so many challenges with COVID on this movie, but at the same time, it did give us a little more time to just let things stew and just ultimately the music and the movie really were built together and kind of grew together over time, because some of the main themes were written and discussed with Destin before they started shooting. And so it happened in lots of chapters. And I think ultimately it became, it's just sort of married to the picture, because they were cutting with this music and we were kind of reacting back and forth between the edit and the music. And it's just lovely to get to work like that, because you stop remembering whose idea things were or where you even started. It just kind of keeps refining together, and then ultimately feels like it's inseparable at the end, which I hope we did. I think we did.
So where do you see? Obviously we're going to get more adventures with Shang and his pals. Maybe, hopefully, some romance going on. How do you how do you see the score developing? How do you see these characters developing?
I don't know. It's what I'm really thankful for is that we had the support to come up with a score for this movie that's so detailed and has so many. Destin's approach to this, I think, especially because the Asian American experience isn't one thing. Being Chinese isn't one thing. There's not this singular narrative. And so I think Destin's approach is to make a movie that is relatable to anybody from any background, and then is just splattered with all kinds of little details from various Asian American experiences, different pieces of those cultures. Because there's just so many, there's just so many different things going on there. And so I think his take was, let's just jam as many cool little treats of cool Asian American, Chinese American things, mainland Chinese cultural things. Just like, let's just put as many in as possible. And so I tried to do that with the score too, where there's just a lot of little things to kind of expand on. Some of which didn't end up making this movie, and some of which ended up being really minimized in the movie. And so I'm excited to just see wherever the narrative is going to go, assuming they do more. I hope they do more. And kind of getting to reset and to me, it's great creative things happen when you feel like you're not quite sure what you're doing and you don't really belong here. And so my hope is that if we do more, we'll kind of feel intimidated again of going like, we don't know what we're going to do. Where are we going to go with this? And just really rethinking, okay, here's the themes we have, and this is where the characters are going to go now, and just kind of letting it breathe and open up and go wherever it's going to go. That to me is exciting, is having no idea where that would go. But I'm really grateful that we came out with a lot to work with, like a lot of little different thematic worlds that we could kind of expand on. And there's a lot of stuff too that I was trying with those themes that I thought was cool, but it just couldn't find a place in the movie. So I have a lot of ideas just that didn't make this version of this movie that I would love to get to expand on another one.
And our last question for the show today is kind of the age-old Hollywood question. Obviously this is a career-changing score, I think. And Lou would love to know, can you tell us about some projects you are working on next? What's next?
Yeah. The project I've been working on has been a new baby. This movie ended up taking on and off almost 2 years, and it's an interesting thing for me personally, just because the whole experience of the pandemic is connected to this movie for me, because it covered, not that we're out of it, but just, the start all the way to now, and vaccinations and stuff. Like, every chapter of COVID has been part of a chapter of the movie. And so what I'm doing right now is kind of just taking a little break to be with the fam, be with my kids, and I'm also doing some songwriting. So I'm not sure what movie I'm going to work on next, kind of figuring that out. Hoping to kind of get to keep working in. I just love getting to build thematic worlds, and having a chance to do that. So it's so rare, especially there's a lot of reboots going on and that have existing music. So hopefully, my hope is that the next thing will give me another chance to kind of just to get to explore themes, and also just work with big orchestras. It's so fun and cool to get to do that, because it's something I could never fund on my own. So we'll see. No idea.
Well, in closing, I'm going to go to the Bowl on Friday to see the Black Panther live in concert. And dude, I can certainly imagine seeing this movie at the Bowl and having it performed live. Has that been floated about maybe?
It has not. I mean, this thing just came out, but that would be amazing. I will be there at the Bowl. I'm very excited to. The Black Panther score is so good. Ludwig is such a cool brain, such a dedicated artist. I'm really excited for him. I will maybe see you there with a mask on.
Excellent. Well, may N95 and may the Oscar gods be smiling upon you for a nomination with this wonderful score. Joel, I want to thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. I want you all to watch Shang-Chi, the master of Kung Fu, as I like to call him, in theaters, preferably on IMAX, with Joel P. West's score available on Walt Disney Records. Thanks to our show producer, Dale Turner, Mark Northam, Mark Banning, Maria Kleinman, Holly Battaglia, and Jenny Wilson. We'll see you on the next Film Music Live to hear Mark Mancina cry macho. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.